More than 12,000 lives had been lost in the decade-long conflict ravaging northern Burkina Faso. The nation was exhausted, bleeding from wounds that no military operation had managed to heal. President Ibrahim Traore, once a soldier, who believed force could restore order, had come to a painful realization. The war could not be won with guns. So, without fanfare, without weapons, and without telling a soul, he left the presidential compound alone, headed into the heart of enemy territory to meet the most dangerous man in the Sahel. That morning in Ouagadougou had begun like any other. Traore sat at a modest table, sipping bitter tea while scanning the intelligence briefs. The news was relentless: another village torched, 23 dead, a school burned to its foundation. The same brutal pattern, over and over. Military units overstretched, civilians disillusioned, terror spreading like wildfire. He folded the papers and approached the window. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Children in uniforms wove through traffic on their way to school. Vendors arranged vegetables under fading tarps. People moved with purpose, yet all of it felt like choreography over a fault line. He saw it. In their eyes, the fear, the weariness, the quiet desperation. The night before, an elderly imam had approached him during a state reception. He had bowed, pressed a piece of folded paper into Traore's hand, and vanished before anyone could question him. The name on that note had stopped him cold. Muhammed El-Gazawi. The man was a ghost, ruthless, elusive, worshipped by some, hunted by many. He commanded the shadow of the Sahel, the most feared militant network in the region. The message he sent was brief. Meet me, alone, no guards, no weapons, coordinates enclosed. A chance for peace. It was madness. His advisors would never approve. His allies would call it a betrayal. But deep down, Traore knew this war had reached its dead end. The system was broken, and if there was even a sliver of hope in this meeting, it was worth the risk. 10 minutes later, dressed in plain khakis and a light cotton shirt, he slipped into a nondescript jeep. He told his chief of staff he needed time alone in his childhood village. The excuse was enough. He drove through the city gates without a second glance, disappearing into the dust of the northern road. The further north he went, the more familiar the terrain became, the more haunted. Burned-out vehicles rusted on roadsides. Schools stood gutted, windows shattered, walls peppered with bullet holes. Children stared with hollow eyes from doorways. Men stood in silence, watching him pass. 6 hours later, just before the Mali border, he arrived at the coordinates, a barren plain beneath a tangle of acacia trees. Nothing but silence and heat. He turned off the engine. Waited. Then they came 3 battered pickup trucks, moving fast across the flatlands. Black flags, flapping behind them, dust curled behind their wheels. Armed men rode in the back, eyes hidden behind scarves, rifles resting on their knees. Traore stepped out, hands raised to show he was unarmed. The trucks surrounded him, engines idled. No one spoke. From the center vehicle stepped a tall figure, face uncovered, robes pale and rippling in the desert wind. He was younger than expected, sharp features, eyes like steel. No theatrics, just presence. President Traore, he said. You asked me to come, Traore replied, steady, and you came alone. El-Gazawi's voice was calm, measured. That means you're serious. It means I've run out of options. A faint smile. Good, let's get out of this, son. They walked together to a tent nestled under a tree. Inside, no guards, no weapons, just 2 cushions, a pot of tea, and the heavy weight of everything unspoken. Traore sat. El-Gazawi poured the tea. Now, the president asked. El-Gazawi looked him in the eye. Because neither of us is winning. You can't kill an idea. We can't conquer the state. But our people, yours and mine, they are the ones paying. You still call them yours? I was born in Djibo. I studied engineering in Ouagadougou before the arrests started. My brother was tortured and executed. He was innocent. That was the beginning for me. Violence didn't radicalize me. The system did. Traore had heard it before, variations of the same story, from fighters, villagers, refugees, but this time, it carried more weight. It came from the source. What do you want? He asked. Autonomy, dignity, a future, for the North, and the killings, the bombings, the schools you've destroyed. Some weren't ours, some were rogue, and some were deliberate. Symbols of a state that has abandoned us, of foreign interference, of cultural erasure. Children died, Traore said, quietly. They die every day from hunger, from disease, from being forgotten. Where was the outcry then? They sat in silence. Traore didn't come to argue. He came to ask one question. What would it take for your men to lay down arms? El-Gazawi didn't hesitate. All foreign troops must leave. The North must govern itself, and my fighters need amnesty. Not for me, but for them. They need a place in what comes next. Traore listened. The demands weren't impossible. Painful, yes. Politically volatile, but not impossible. And in return, a ceasefire, hostages released, weapons down, fighters integrated, a beginning. Can you control them all? 80%. The rest will follow if they see it's real. If they don't, they become enemies of us both. The sun dipped low outside the tent. The heat gave way to dry wind. 1 province, Traore said. 30 days, your men withdraw. We pull out the army, joint patrols, aid workers, teachers. One province, a test. El-Gazawi looked at him for a long moment. Soum? He said. That's where we start. Traore nodded. Soum was the heart of the conflict. Its choice was bold, risky, real. They kept talking into the dusk, into the dark, mapping out how it could work, how it could fail, how to keep it hidden from those who would sabotage it before it began. Before leaving, Traore made one last request. Let me speak with them. Your men. El-Gazawi called forward 3 fighters. One had been a farmer, another, a teacher, the last, barely old enough to remember peace. They told him their stories, not excuses. Explanations. As Traore climbed back into his jeep, El-Gazawi walked with him. You took a risk, he said. Why? Because no one else would. The rebel extended his hand. In 30 days, we'll see if you were brave or just a fool. Traore shook it. Maybe both. He drove through the night. The stars overhead were endless. Silent. Witnesses? By dawn, he slipped back into Ouagadougou through a side gate. A figure stepped from the shadows. Colonel Wedriogo, head of security. You've been gone a day. No contact, no detail. We were preparing for the worst. Traore exhaled. Walk with me. Inside his office, behind closed doors, he told Wedriogo everything. The colonel stared at him, stunned. Then anger boiled over. You could have been killed. I had to try. If I failed, others would take over. But if I succeeded, did you? We'll know in 30 days. Soum will be our proof. They'll push back. The army? The French? Even your own cabinet? I know. Which is why we begin quietly. No press. No headlines. We move, we build. If it collapses, no one needs to know. But if it works, ... For days, President Ibrahim Traore held confidential briefings with only his most trusted advisors, the defense minister, intelligence chief, and foreign minister. Opinions varied. Some were cautiously optimistic, others flat out opposed. But Traore's authority was unquestionable. Orders were quietly issued for a strategic redeployment in Soum province, couched in vague language that would avoid raising immediate suspicions. Troop movements were recast as logistical adjustments. 6 days after his clandestine dessert meeting, Traore received a cryptic text from an unknown number. The hawks are in their nests. The doves may fly. It was El-Gazawi's, coded, confirmation as fighters had pulled back from offensive positions. That same day, Traore enacted a plan long in the making. Heavy artillery was removed, and military presence across key parts of Soum was scaled back. In its place, a new kind of force emerged. Hybrid security units combining government soldiers with vetted local volunteers, tasked with defense and community protection, not assault. The first week passed under a cloud of tension. Everyone in both sides expected betrayal, but none came. By the second week, a shift began to take hold. Farmers returned to fields left fallow for years. Markets reopened. Children, for the first time in a generation, played freely in village courtyards. Then came the most audacious move yet. Without announcement or military escort, Traore traveled to Djibo, the provincial capital that had been a battleground for nearly a decade. Alongside him came engineers, doctors, and truckloads of materials to repair water pumps, schools, and clinics. His presence stunned the local population. The president here, on foot, speaking face-to-face with citizens in a war-torn zone seemed unthinkable. Unbeknownst to the public, El-Gazawi had been in Djibo the night before. Discreetly, he ensured his fighters upheld the ceasefire, testing the mood in the community. The two leaders never appeared together, but a secure phone line between them remained active, keeping the fragile process moving. By the 4th week, whispers of transformation in Soum began to ripple across Burkina Faso. Journalists began asking pointed questions. Opposition politicians demanded clarity. Foreign embassies, especially the French, expressed unease about what they called a security vacuum. Traore knew it was time to go public. On the 28th day of the ceasefire, President Traore addressed the nation live, not from the capital, but from Djibo itself, flanked by local leaders of diverse ethnic and religious backgrounds. He spoke directly to the camera. 1 month ago, I took an unprecedented step in search of peace. He began. I met with Muhammed El-Gazawi, the leader of the shadow of the Sahel. Gasps echoed through the press corps. Traore continued, unfazed. This was not surrender. Nor was it a negotiation with terrorism. It was an acknowledgement of reality. After 10 years of conflict and 12,000 deaths, military solutions alone have failed. We needed to break the cycle of destruction. He outlined the new model taking shape: localized ceasefires, community-based security units, rapid development projects, and the empowerment of local governance structures. No foreign nations were consulted. He emphasized a pointed message to France, whose military interventions had often worsened instability. For 28 days, not a single civilian has died from conflict in Soum province. Markets are bustling again. Schools are preparing to reopen. This is not yet peace, but it is a glimpse of what peace could look like. He then announced the model's expansion into the neighboring provinces of Yaga and Yatlan. Disarmament would be encouraged, not through blanket amnesty, but through justice-oriented reintegration and reconciliation. The speech ignited a storm. Hardliners in the military decried the president's engagement with terrorists. Opposition leaders accused him of endangering the nation. The French embassy issued a stern rebuke, but in Djibo, the president's walk through the streets turned into something extraordinary. An elderly woman approached him, took his hands, and said softly, "My grandson can sleep through the night now, thank you." Later that evening, El-Gazawi's voice crackled through the secure line. "Your speech landed well in our communities," he said, "but the window is narrow. Foreign fighters are arriving from Mali sent by those who profit from chaos. They will try to sabotage this peace. My hold over my men is strong, but strained. They need results, jobs, dignity. Words alone won't carry this." Traore nodded. He understood the urgency. "Tomorrow, we begin operations in Odalan and Yaga. Your commanders have their instructions. No attacks. Defensive positions only. Allow development teams to pass." The next 3 months tested the fragile architecture of peace. Twice, rogue insurgents launched attacks. El-Gazawi's loyalists helped identify and contain them. Once, an overzealous army officer ordered a raid on a suspected hideout. Traore reassigned him the next day. Gradually, the model expanded to 5, then 8 provinces. Challenges persisted: sporadic violence, deep mistrust, foreign meddling. But a trend emerged where the new framework was applied. Civilian casualties dropped by over 80%. Agricultural output rose. Life hesitant, scarred, but resilient returned. 6 months after his secret desert meeting, President Traore took the boldest step yet. He invited El-Gazawi to participate in nationally televised peace talks in the capital, Ouagadougou. The announcement sparked outrage. Protesters marched. 2 cabinet ministers resigned. France issued a diplomatic protest, but Traore held firm. El-Gazawi arrived in the capital under heavy security, unarmed as agreed. For the first time in African history, a militant leader was entering a peace process, not after defeat, but as an active participant. But talks were wrenching. Survivors confronted their attackers. Sectarian and ethnic rifts threatened to derail progress. The military resisted any softening of control. Observers questioned whether such a path could hold. Then, during a particularly heated exchange over war crimes accountability, a young woman stood in the gallery. "I lost my entire family to an insurgent attack," she said, her voice tremulous but steady. "I have every reason to want vengeance, but that will not bring them back. I do not forgive what was done, but I want the killing to stop. I want other families to stay whole." Her words shifted the mood. Slowly, talks turned toward solutions: security, integration, development priorities, justice mechanisms that balanced punishment with reconciliation. 2 weeks later, the Ouagadougou Accord was signed. It was not a perfect document, but it was something real. Foreign troops would withdraw, northern regions would gain autonomy. Former fighters would be folded into community policing. A Truth and Reconciliation Commission would seek accountability. As El-Gazawi signed, officially ending his tenure as Burkina Faso's most wanted man, he looked across the table at Traore. In that brief glance past the acknowledgement of a journey no one could have predicted, from sworn enemies to uneasy collaborators in peace. The world responded with mixed emotions. African leaders, facing their own insurgencies, watched with cautious hope. Western analysts debated whether the model was exportable. France, now sidelined, issued only terse statements. A year after the secret desert meeting, President Traore stood on the edge of a village in Soum, once a ghost town, now buzzing with life. Fields were being planted, schools held classes, laughter echoed again. El-Gazawi stood beside him, no longer an insurgent, yet still a controversial figure. The president turned to him. "Did you believe this was possible when you sent that message asking to meet?" El-Gazawi paused. "I believed it was necessary to try. After burying enough comrades and watching too many children die, you begin to question if war is the only path." They stood quietly as village children played in the dust. "The peace is still fragile," Traore said. "Yes," El-Gazawi replied, "but each day it holds. Trust grows. Every reopened market, every repaired home, these lay the foundation." An elderly woman approached them, weathered but direct. "You two brought back our homes," she said, "but the road ahead is long. Will you walk it together?" The question hung between them. "We must," Traore said. "For the sake of these children." El-Gazawi nodded. "The guns have fallen silent. Now we must build something that will outlast both of us." As dusk settled over the village, Traore reflected on the improbable arc that had brought them here. Violence still simmered elsewhere. Political opposition was fierce. Foreign interests had not vanished. But something profound had changed. A country that once resigned itself to endless war had glimpsed another future, one shaped not by foreign blueprints or imposed deals, but by its own people daring to try something different. And it had all begun with a single choice: to listen,